to discuss something about Armenia, and I'm very happy that we're able to do so, especially in such an important moment for Armenia, and also when Armenia got to international news and a lot of international topics with the deal and the declarations being made in the US. So in the upcoming hour, we'll delve into this topic with my esteemed guests here. Thank you so much for joining. Armen Mkhchyan from the SD Platform Armenia. You're the founder of the organizations. Thanks so much for being here, Armen.
Thank you too.
And Marina Ohanjanyan from the Clingendael Institute in the Netherlands, a geopolitical research institute based also here in The Hague. It's a pleasure having you here, Marina, as well.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining. And without further ado, I would just like to delve into the first questions, but without first saying that you as viewers here in this webinar, live streamed on YouTube, can also ask questions, and I would even really hope that you will do so. So in the upcoming hour, I will of course ask some questions to our guests here. But if you have any questions on the situation in Armenia, the region, etc., please ask them in the chat, and I will forward them here in this webinar. So please do so, and you can also rewatch this webinar afterwards. So feel free to send this to as many people as possible. So yeah, without further ado, let's just jump into the what happened in Armenia, the last week. And Armen, I would like to start with you. Armenia was the topic in a lot of international news, with the declaration being made together with Prime Minister Pashinyan and the President of Azerbaijan, Aliyev, in the White House, in the Oval Office with President Trump. Can you tell a little bit first about how the reactions were in Armenia on what happened before we delve into what was exactly this declaration was about? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Emil. First of all, thank you very much for having me as a speaker in this webinar. We'll be happy actually to share all the insights and currently the picture that we see actually from Armenia, all these political discussions. Yeah. What happened actually in Washington? So this signing the initial agreement. So we need to define that this is not a final peace agreement. It's kind of, as I mentioned, a declaration and initial agreement on this. Yeah, it's kind of like created a lot of discussions within the political arena in Armenia. Yeah, there are pros and cons in this initiative, and for sure there are also some fair concerns. On the other hand, we can see that there is a huge excitement actually from the government that this is something amazing, the peace, and finally this is a peace, the agreement will be ready. Yeah, on the other hand, there is disappointment from the opposition, so with having some fair concerns on this topic. So actually, I think everybody managed already to read the news, what's happening. This is the besides the pre-peace agreement. So we are talking about road or corridor. So there are a lot of arguing parties here. It's a road or it's a corridor, yeah, which is going to connect the mainland of Azerbaijan to the Nakhchivan Autonomic Republic. Yeah, the points here actually are whether it's gonna be actually per the documents under the sovereignty and the jurisdiction of Armenia. This is already declared in the agreement as well, but it's not clear yet what should be the regime of that road, of that land. When I say regime, I mean, let's say, for example, other Azerbaijani citizens are going to face with the Armenian customer service officers, I don't know, the Armenian soldiers which are serving in the border. So it's not clear yet. There is information that the US actually, so that is subleasing for 99 years the whole land actually, and the private company is going to locate it there and providing the security of that road and of that corridor. So this is something which, yes, for sure. I mean, if we are going to compare what currently we have with the agreement from 2020, which was signed between Azerbaijan, Russia, and Armenia, Yeah, this part actually was demolished, where in that agreement, it was said that there should be a corridor not under the sovereignty and jurisdiction of Armenia. This agreement actually says that it should be under sovereignty and jurisdiction of Armenia, but there are still like open points. So what should be the regime? I can't, I mean, state, so what's gonna final result be in this case, but maybe it says that the devil actually can be in the details. So I will wait for the more information and the clarity before commenting on this. This is one of the points that opposition says this will be a corridor, not under the sovereignty of Armenia, but yeah, the government says that it's under jurisdiction of Armenia. Yeah, the concerns actually on this, I will try to point out like the main concerns that currently we have, and me myself, I have the actually that concerns. So first point, there is nothing, no mentioning about the displaced people from Nagorno-Karabakh, the Armenians. So kind of that we are closing this topic, like for the future, for the whole history, nothing happened, no ethnic cleanings. So, but there is a fact that 120,000 Armenians were living in their motherland, and currently they are not there. So this is a big concern, from point of Armenians, from that people that lost everything. So there is no mentioning about that. Furthermore, actually, there is a point that Azerbaijan and Armenia, they are having a commitment to apply for dissolvement of the Minsk group, OSCE Minsk group. So this is also something not clear why we are doing this. If we are saying that we can say that there is no conflict. The Minsk group actually was formed to be the moderator of this conflict, of the whole Nagorno-Karabakh issue. If we are stating and saying that there is no conflict, then what's the future for the displaced people? What's the future for the Armenian cultural heritage in Nagorno-Karabakh? Yeah, these are all open topics. The next one is as you heard from the news, the 907 section, which is adopted by the US Congress. So they are which were banning actually the military supplement to Azerbaijan. So per this deal, actually, which and I can't understand actually how it relates to this peace agreement. So US, Trump actually is going to start the supplements. Congress still should admit this, but yeah, he goes for that. They promised that there won't be any ban on this, and they are going to get the military supply. So this is also concern how the Azerbaijan is going to use that
military supply is exporting towards Azerbaijan, if I could understand.
From US to Azerbaijan, yeah.
Exactly.
So before this, actually, there were section which is called 907, which were actually banning US to sell, to provide, to supply the military weapons to Azerbaijan. Yeah. Now actually they are also demolishing this, and they will go for that. This is also really concern. I mean, it's clear one day where actually this weapon can be used.
Yeah.
Also, one more point that maybe you can go with the questions, or maybe Marina will continue. Right now, actually, so 250 kilometer squares of Armenian sovereign territories. I'm not talking about Nagorno-Karabakh, or Armenian sovereign territories are occupied right now. The Azerbaijani military forces there, and there is nothing, no mentioning in this agreement about that. So these are all the major points that we want to understand before going to the peace agreement. I mean, okay, there can be, for sure, the negotiations are also considering the concessions, but the concessions should be from both sides, actually. But what actually the Armenian society sees that Armenia is the only side that is going for the concessions. If you, let's try to recall what is the concession from Azerbaijani side, I can say actually, but this is that they are not going to attack us. This is the only concession, I mean, in this bilateral or trilateral negotiations, and this is not good. Actually, this is not going to form and to create the long life peace. Actually, like you can't push the one side, push. Okay, you need to go for concessions, but nothing from the other side. Yeah. There is also a point which is that both sides, actually Azerbaijan and Armenia, they are committing that they need to fight against the separatism, terrorism, and such stuff within their countries. So this is also a matter of interpretation. So when we talk about separatism, let's say if I am going to talk about the Armenian cultural heritage and displaced people from Nagorno-Karabakh, is this a separatism or not? So there are a lot of open points that can be concerning. Yeah.
So a lot of concerns from your side, Armen. Clear. Thanks for this overview, and also want to delve in a bit deeper on your take and your observation, of course, being in Armenia, on the domestic political situation and reactions from people from political opposition, but also from the side of the party of Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan. But I'm also very curious on your take, Marina, on this declaration. And were you surprised about this happening to start? But also, can you tell a bit more about what this declaration entails and also what it does not? Because it's not a peace agreement, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, you're right. I think we should separate the two things that were signed. So one, or initialed or agreed. One is the, let's say, the peace treaty that, as Armen mentioned, was not signed, was just initialed. And the difference, I'm not a legal expert, but as I understand it, the difference is the binding part. So it's not binding at the moment. So if you're a pessimist, you'll say, it's a piece of paper, how do we know what happens next? The second document was a joint declaration together with President Trump, where there's more information on the Zangezur route and what that means, although again, there's quite a lot of unclarities. When it comes to the peace agreement, I would say, and I do agree with Armen, I had the same concerns about the whole negotiation process actually being quite one-sided when you look in the past 5 years, because negotiations have been going on for much, much longer than that. But since 2020, especially 2023, the situation changed very dramatically. And the negotiations were taking place in very different conditions. It was clear that it was not an equal kind of negotiation process, especially since in the beginning they were still being mediated by other powers. Russia was really trying very hard to keep the negotiations in its kind of sphere. The EU stepped in, which was quite interesting, to try and lead the mediation effort. The US has made some effort. But in the end, the two parties, Armenia and Azerbaijan, basically decided to do it bilaterally. Because there was really no mediator to be found that both could accept. So Russia became unacceptable for Armenia because it completely lost trust in Russia as a mediator or partner. And it seems to me that the EU became less acceptable for Azerbaijan. Also, when you look at the attitude towards the monitoring mission that the EU sent along the borders, which was quite negative in Azerbaijan. So in the end, they were left by themselves. They continued negotiations on bilateral terms. That's how they came with these 17 points that have been ready for some time. So this wasn't something negotiated by Trump. It's only been published now. But it is true that the process had been quite unequal. And I had the same concerns about the sustainability of this peace if it does get signed. Because normally you would hope to have some sort of compromise, some sort of concessions on both sides that would ensure the durability. In this case, the power positions were so different, with Azerbaijan clearly having a lot more influence and a lot more military power, financial power, better allies, that it looked much more one-sided. So in that sense, I'm not entirely surprised by the document that came out. And I have to say, considering that framework, I would say on paper, it actually doesn't look very bad, considering those points. Because again, I think both sides were able to get some points that they're able to sell at home. For Armenia, Armen also mentioned the issue of sovereignty and territorial integrity is mentioned several times, which was a key issue for Armenia, and that is a change from the agreement that was made under Russia's auspices. And the territorial integrity applies not only to the Zangezur route, but indeed to some of these the kind of small bits of occupied territory inside Armenia, which does beg the question of what happens next, if that's true. One interesting point was also the mention of the 1991 Almaty Declaration, which is the basis on which these borders are then recognized in theory. This was something that Armenia was kind of hoping and wanting, because they basically, to put it simply, look at the borders as they were within the Soviet Union and kind of take on the same borders for the independent states afterwards. This is the principle that Armenia was pushing for. Azerbaijan wanted to use other maps, which may have been more beneficial. Again, this refraining from territorial claims, this is something that I think both probably wanted, because for some, there is a fear, there seems to be a fear in Azerbaijan for kind of feelings of revenge or anything like that on the long term in Armenia. So this is something that I think they both wanted. I think a point that Azerbaijan was really hoping for, or was pushing for, is the idea of no third-party forces being deployed along their border. This is a direct reference to the European monitoring mission that Azerbaijan is really pushing to kind of get rid of. Another important point that I think should be mentioned is the sentence about the fact that no internal or national legislation basically goes above this. This is an interesting point, because one of the demands of Azerbaijan at the moment, before signing this agreement, is that Armenia has to change its constitution, because there's an indirect reference to Nagorno-Karabakh in a preamble. And so this has been really a demand. It's interesting to me how this will be interpreted, because the sentence about no national level legislation going above this agreement seems to kind of undercut that demand, because then clearly also the constitution shouldn't be a problem. So we'll see how that develops. A last point that I'll mention is the one on precluding any international legal claims towards each other. This is something that Azerbaijan also, I imagine, demanded or wanted. And this has also to do specifically with some legal claims ongoing, actually in The Hague, at the International Criminal Court from Armenia against Azerbaijan, having to do with the wars and war crimes that Azerbaijan has been accused of. And Azerbaijan has been quite eager to kind of get rid of these claims. In a sense, I think Armenia was still able to get a point in, because the text says that these claims will be retracted a month after ratification of this agreement. So they still insist on this agreement at least being in place. For a while, it looked like this would have to happen anyway. So in that sense, there are some points. But in essence, Armen also does have a point that the biggest thing that Armenia would get from this, on paper at least, is that Azerbaijan doesn't attack. I think for Armenia, that's probably the main point. Some unclarities and issues are also, Armen mentioned some. One is, of course, the non-binding nature. So how serious is this going to be in real life? Because again, on paper, it looks within the margins of the realistic, within the margins of what could be expected, somewhat quite reasonable. But how binding is it? What happens if it gets violated? The elephant in the room is also, that's another point, is Trump's attention span. What happens now that the pictures have been taken? He has been proclaimed to be the big peacemaker, and the cameras move on. Will the attention remain or not? I think this whole investment track of I'm assuming American private companies investing in this corridor was an attempt to keep this American interest going. We'll see if that works. And another thing for me is also the role of the EU. To be honest, it's really quite, I don't know if to call it strange or even disappointing that it's not the EU that takes the lead in this process, because for the EU, there is a very I mean, it's physically closer, it's politically closer, I'd say. It really has been trying in the last years to kind of have a bigger presence in the region, have a bigger presence in this process. It has a vested interest in solving this conflict because it is on the outskirts of Europe. It is on a very important logistical route, the Middle Corridor, that ends in Europe. So it is quite, in that sense, quite surprising that Europe doesn't seem to play any role in this. At the same time, I think there is still a role to play because now we have some agreements on paper. Even though they're not legally binding, there is something on paper. There has been a very symbolic moment, which I don't think should be underestimated, in the White House, with both presidents pledging their agreements to these points, with Aliyev actually saying that Azerbaijan is not going to initiate any, or neither of the parties are going to initiate any aggression. Now comes the part of implementation. I think this is where Europe could really play a role in making sure that the parties stick to the premises of this agreement, to make sure that there's progress, etc., etc. Very briefly, I don't want to take too much time, but I do want to come back to the second document. So that's the joint declaration of Prime Minister Pashinyan, President Aliyev, and President Trump. Armen mentioned basically the disbandment of the OSCE Minsk group. This is something that also Azerbaijan really wanted for some time now. Indeed, they consider the conflict to be solved. This does basically, in legal political terms, probably mean the closure of that issue for Azerbaijan at least. But this is something that could be expected. It was actually assumed that this would happen already. The question of the refugees and of the cultural heritage does indeed remain, and it's a bit unclear if there's any avenues now to kind of pursue that. On the Zangezur route, this was really the centerpiece, I think, of the whole thing, probably for Trump as well. But questions do remain. So the good thing is that there's the connectivity is defined as being on the basis of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and jurisdiction of the relevant state. So this was a major point for Armenia. It seems on paper, at least, to keep its sovereignty and territorial integrity. But there are questions. For instance, the document provides for unimpeded connectivity between Azerbaijan proper and its exclave Nakhchivan through Armenian territory. How does that combine with this territorial integrity and sovereignty of Armenia? So does Armenia, are there going to be border checks? Is there going to be any kind of Armenian police presence? If this is Armenian territory, what happens if there's incidents? And I'm not even talking about major security incidents, but what happens in a traffic, accident, or who's responsible? So indeed, I also saw the same kind of interpretation that there might be a third party hired to provide for that security. It might be a big cause for worry because it does sound quite intransparent and kind of a division of security. In general, giving up security tasks to private companies, there have been problems with that in the past in the world. So we'll see what happens there. Another term that kind of caught my attention is reciprocal benefits. So there would be reciprocal benefits from this route. In the Armenian context, so the Armenian side has been wanting to have a reciprocal effect, to have a similar kind of connectivity through Azerbaijani territory. Azerbaijan has always been against it, as far as I know. So what does this reciprocity mean exactly? That's quite unclear. And again, also here, there's a question of Trump's attention. So how important is this for the Trump administration? How much attention will they keep to this? And the same question on the role of the EU. Can the EU still play a role in this or not? I was struck by one statement. I think it was the Armenian Minister of Foreign Affairs, or at least a spokesman, who said that their goal is to attract bigger involvement, to attract other partners wherever possible in building this route. And there is space for that in the agreement. So I'm quite interested to see what those partners might be. This was in context, the quote was in the context of saying, this is not meant against other countries, this is not a confrontation, so we're open to all kinds of participation. So does this mean that Armenia will be open to participants like Russia or Iran, which to me seems, at least Russia seems quite, unlikely, because Armenia has been trying very hard to diminish its dependency on Russia? Or does this mean that they're actually opening the door to some European involvement or others than being left alone one-on-one with just President Trump? I think I'll stop there for now. Let me know if...
No, a very clear overview. Thanks, Marina. And as you say, also in your last point, and earlier as well, that the EU has a vested interest also in the region, in the sense that there is also a lot of trade going through the middle corridor. And in a sense, that maybe links also up with your point on other parties also potentially being interested in this Zangezur corridor. And of course, Armenia has also opened up a lot of cooperation and a lot of relationships with the EU, also with, I think, some parliamentary resolutions saying that they in the future also want to apply for EU membership potentially. So that also shows a geopolitical change happening for Armenia in the last couple of years. And maybe to follow up on that question shortly before moving back to you, Armen, on more domestic reactions. Can you tell a little bit more, Marina, about the role of Russia and Iran here? Because you also said that Russia was very involved in the 2020 ceasefire agreement, but now much less involved. And I suppose also for Iran, the corridor, which is very, very close to Iranian border with Armenia, with potentially US private companies being present there, is also not something that Iran is most happy with. Is that the case? And have there been replies from both Russia and Iran on what's happening?
There have been. I'll start with Russia and then I'll move to Iran. So when it comes to Russia, I think that has been probably the biggest geopolitical change in the region, but especially when it comes to Armenia in the past several years. After the wars in Nagorno-Karabakh 2020, but especially after 2023, but also after Azerbaijani incursions in Armenia in 21 and 22, basically the Armenian government, and probably, but Armen can tell this better, probably the population as well, lost trust in Russia as a security partner. And drew the conclusion that Armenia cannot count on Russia to provide for its security, which means that, which was the main reason for Armenia to be kind of an ally of Russia, to be relatively loyal to Russia, and to have quite a far-reaching relationship with Russia. So for the last couple of years, Armenia has been working very hard to distance from Russia, and has been implementing what it calls a diversification policy. So trying to strengthen relations elsewhere and diminish dependency on Russia and kind of increase the political distance to Russia. They did several things. They froze their membership in the military alliance, the CSTO, that's Russia-led. The general kind of sense of the dialogue with Russia has become more tense. They worked hard to improve relations with the West being one of the important pillars of this diversification, not the only one, but one of the important ones. You mentioned the law that was passed in the Armenian parliament of seeking European membership. All of these are kind of developments that I think would have been completely unimaginable just several years ago. So Armenia has been trying to kind of distance from Russia. And this agreement, even just on paper, I would say really demonstrates the level to which Russia has lost this region, has lost it entirely, because there are still major dependencies on Russia when it comes to energy, when it comes to economy, and there have been some bilateral memorandums signed in Washington that pertain to that as well, which if we have time we can discuss as well. But I think Russia is one of the bigger powers. Russia is the one that probably lost the most in this process, because this solidifies US presence, if this indeed is implemented, and diminishes Russia's influence. Because as Armen mentioned, in the original idea of this route, this corridor, it was going to be Russian FSB agents to provide food security. Russia would have a foothold. Russia would have a very significant role in an important transport route. that is no longer the case. But interestingly, the official reaction from Moscow has been quite mild. So they basically welcomed this progress in peacemaking. I haven't really seen any critical word from officials. I'm just talking about Russian officials because the propagandists are a bit different. I think this has mostly to do with Russia's goal of not alienating Trump, especially in the run-up to this big kind of summit that they're organizing in Alaska. What is it, in a couple of days?
Yeah.
So this wouldn't have been the right time to start being critical. I think it has mostly to do with that. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the slightly longer term. So will Russia still try to kind of preclude this from happening? Will it try to interfere? That's something to be seen. But for now, the reactions have been actually quite mild. When it comes to Iran, it's also an interesting case because indeed, Iran has had quite a consistent position when it comes to the Zangezur route, or Zangezur corridor, as Azerbaijan calls it. They have always been against such a corridor, and they've always spoke out against any, as they called it, changing of the borders in this region, because it would cut off basically their access to the north, because they have a very important access to Russia goes through Armenia. This would cut them off, so they have always resisted this and basically supported Armenia in that sense. I was quite interesting to hear what they would think of this, because obviously having a US kind of foothold on the ground is not something that Tehran is expected to like. I'm not an Iran expert, so I'm kind of treading on thin ice here, but from what I've seen is that it's been a bit of a divided reaction. On the one hand by the Iranian government, so the political leadership, on the other hand by the clerical leadership. And that latter is arguably probably more important. The political leadership has been, again, quite mild. I think it was the Minister of Foreign Affairs that said that Iran's concerns had been taken into account, that they didn't have any problem with the route itself, but they did have some issues with the commercial involvement of the US, which seems much less kind of alarming than if it would have been a security involvement. At the same time, I think it was the main advisor to Khamenei, the clerical leader, was much more critical. He called it a corridor. He said that Armenia was being, I think, said it was divided, or Iran was being cut off, and that Iran would not accept it. So it will be interesting to see how this plays out, because these are quite, I would say, quite different messages. And it's a bit unclear what happens there. The third power that we haven't mentioned, but I think is important to mention, is Turkey. Turkey has always been a proponent of such a route, because it also connects Azerbaijan with Turkey. There's a small bit of border between Nakhchivan and Turkey that then opens up. From what I understand is that actually Armenia and Turkey have been working to normalize their relations, and the biggest thing there was opening of their border, because it has been closed since 1994. From what I understand from my conversations in Yerevan, at least, is that actually the negotiations were going quite well, and there was, on both sides, there was a lot of willingness to open the border. Only Ankara keeps sticking to its promise of not opening the border until there's actual a peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, out of solidarity with Azerbaijan. So my biggest question with this was whether this is enough for Ankara to open the border, and that's unclear yet. But Turkey was the first country to respond in a very positive way to this peace declaration. So we'll see what happens there, because opening of that border would really be a game changer for the entire region, including for Armenia itself, because it provided with a actual alternative trade routes, alternative access also towards Europe, in the direction of Europe.
Yeah, interesting. And indeed, geographically it opens up such a big stretch of border,
Yeah.
of course, for Armenia, which is being closed now. Thanks a lot for this overview, Marina. We also got a question in the chat, but before delving into that question, which actually involves another regional country, is Georgia, but we will delve into it later. I would like to go back to you, Armen, more on domestic political situation, because you also just mentioned already a little bit on it. But I'm curious about the reactions domestically from political parties, main political forces, because in the past we've also seen that there has been big protests and civil unrest after deals, after the ceasefire agreement, or after developments between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and how is that now? Is that also the case, and what have been the main reactions?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. At this level, actually, this is kind of on a level of official announcements, and that's all. So the oppositional parties that did their announcements and condemned actually not actually the peace agreement, but the process of going to peace, but all the concerns that actually me and Marina mentioned before in terms of the national interests of Armenia, underestimating them, and also not taking into account. I don't want to repeat all that concerns. Yes. So we have a situation where from the governmental party, actually, there is a exaggerated excitement, and yeah, maybe I would say from the opposition parties, exaggerated disappointment. So yeah, there is a kind of a big throw for sure in this process. At least, yeah, if there is a negotiation, then it means that we're not going into war. But yeah, I mean, we need to take into account all the risks actually that can be put it under this agreement that we discussed. So yes, still actually this step by step is becoming main political discussion topic in Armenia, and also I think this is going to be the main kind of a program during the election in 2026. The government parties is going to say that we bring a peace, so you need to vote for us, and then the opposition, I think, is going to tell that this is not a real peace and the loss of sovereignty. So we need to see, actually, as I mentioned, we still need more details, actually, what is going to happen. Marina mentioned, actually, that after this pre-agreement, actually, the Aliyev also announced that the other precondition is the change of constitution for Armenia. This is not going to happen for sure until the 2026 elections. After that, actually, we'll need at least 1 year to organize the process of the constitutional change elections. And finally, so we don't know that this change is going to happen during the referendum. At least I know that we have some difficulties because the constitutional change should happen when you have more than 600,000 votes. But it will be really hard, actually, to get that votes, like in general. Because the rating, actually, of the participation during our elections is very low for all the elections, the local elections, the parliamentary elections. So this is something kind of, it seems to me like Aliyev knows about that. He knows that it's not gonna happen, and he's kind of okay, guys. I told you that they are not going to change the constitution. Then it's not gonna happen. The peace agreement seems to me at this point kind of a game, but from the diplomatic game, let's say, from the Azerbaijani side. But yeah, let's see. This is the current situation. More developments maybe come like after. We have actually to talk about the internal political situation. Since there is going to be a consolidation around the Armenian Russian oligarch, Clingendael Institute. He is currently like in jail, actually. So, but they are already announced that they are going to form a new political party, having actually the alternative, the third alternative political forces. This is actually the wheel of Armenian society, starting from the war of Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020. But still, we don't have that alternative. So I'm not sure which political force is going to be the alternative to the government and to the current opposition. Actually, the current opposition itself, they are announcing that, yes, we do agree. We really need some refresh in the political arena. We don't mind if like kind of a new oppositional parties and forces will be formed. But let's see. Still, it's quite early to discuss. I know that they announced about that they are forming a new political party, but no details yet. South Caucasus is still in jail. Yeah, let's see.
Yeah, so you delved
Under
also already
prosecution.
in one of the questions I wanted to ask you as well on the follow-up on the domestic replies is indeed that elections are quite quickly approaching. I think it's June 7, 2026, so in less than a year. And as I understand correctly, there will again be like two big blocs definitely participating. The party of Nikol Pashinyan, which is civil contract party, and also the established opposition of parties that have been around for a long time and also have decreased in popularity in latter years. And you expect maybe a third force coming up there.
Yeah. For sure, we can see that some formations happening actually in the political arena, especially for the opposition. I expect that we will see new oppositional forces or at least coalitions or the groups of negotiations, as far as I know, happening between the political forces, so that to understand whether they can cooperate or not. But I think for sure we don't have the same picture and the same participation of political parties as we did 4 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there have been
Or
local
5 years,
elections
sorry.
also earlier this year, if I'm correct.
Yeah,
And
in
then
Gyumri, in the second city of
the second
Armenia.
city, which is really important and also kind of
Yeah.
a gauge for what can happen. And the Pashinyan party did not do very well,
Yeah,
right?
still actually, they gained the majority of the votes, but then it was not enough actually to create a coalition, and the opposition groups actually created and formed the coalition, and now they are ruling the second city of Gyumri.
Yeah, exactly. And what do you expect here also? Is that kind of projection of what can happen also next year? Is the Pashinyan party has it decreased in popularity in the last couple of years? And how will the current geopolitical situation and this declaration will it play into that
The service actually states that for sure their rating has decreased, but anyway they will still gain the majority of the votes, but then I don't think they will need to go for the coalition. But what to expect, I don't know with whom they are going to cooperate. But for sure, I think, in my opinion, they are not going to get the 50% plus votes.
Yeah.
As they did actually in 2021. This time, I think they need some cooperation, but still it's unclear. For sure, it won't be with any oppositional party. I don't think we have such turnarounds. But yeah, I mean, there are still some
Which
other
have kept for,
parties,
yeah.
but they are like kind of they besides the actually civil contract and the opposition, there are also like very minor parties, and I don't think they are going to get like more votes. So it's not clear to me what's going to happen. So it's really hard to predict, but I think for sure they are going to have some cooperation and eventually to create a coalition if they are planning to win the elections. But for sure the rating actually has been decreased. But I'm not sure. Let's see what's gonna happen after these peace initiatives.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe they are betting for that after this agreement, actually, the rating is gonna increase significantly. But I'm not sure. Let's see. Yeah, for sure. Like right now, there is a really ambiguous and unclear situation. I wouldn't say that the whole community and society is like are happy, and so there are a lot of concerns. So yeah.
Yeah, and those
We
concerns you
need to
also
wait.
very well, you also spelled out in the beginning of our webinar. And these concerns are, probably across Armenia very, very prevalent. Maybe final question on this to you, Armen, before moving back to you, Marina, is do you expect, I think you also mentioned it shortly, do you expect this to be like the major topic for towards and in the campaign of next year's elections, the geopolitical situation, security situation, or would you foresee other topics also being very, very important in the upcoming elections? The question is to you, Armen.
For sure, yeah, for sure. The security, and unfortunately, actually, we are in a situation that security actually is our main concern. I mean, and it's really hard to concentrate on the other, like social justice topic, especially for us as a social democratic platform, civic initiative. I mean, yeah, let's say we would like for sure to contribute to the political agenda and the political programs for the upcoming elections. But yeah, at this point, it's really naive to go on to discuss about social democracy when the main concerns are whether war will start or not, what's going to happen, are we with EU or are we with Russia or with USA? So for sure, the security, all the events that's going to happen around the peace agreement framework are going to be the main triggers of the winning or losing the elections. Yeah. I mean, this is for sure. Unfortunately, still, the political programs actually, I'm predicting that they are not going to include the more economical stuff. I don't know, social justice stuff. I don't know, like the poverty or so on. I don't know, to discuss the healthcare or education. The main topic is still gonna be, I would say that the government actually is gonna say, oh, if we are not win actually the elections, then what's gonna happen with peace agreement? Then the war will start. This is kind of also can be like manipulation. Yeah. On the other hand, the opposition will tell that we are losing everything. This is a really concerning. Yeah, for sure concerning, but we need to understand what was the solution from this. I mean, yeah, for sure, the war is not a solution, especially for Armenia. We don't want war, and we are not ready for a war, actually. Starting from not morally, but also if we talk about military equipment and weapons and so on. So we are not ready and we don't want war. But I mean, we need to also speak about our concerns and try to conduct our diplomacy in a way where we can also gain something and not only lose and not only that go for the concessions. Yeah, I mean, we still have a state. We still need to have a diplomacy to go for the negotiations and to end up to the results, to the diplomatical results, where Armenia also will have a benefit, and especially we'll be able to move forward for the future and to develop in the future. Like when we are talking about, Marina mentioned actually that there is a article also which says in the agreement that third parties can't be located within the country because the border. I mean, why the EU observing mission should be withdrawn there? I mean, I can't understand. Or maybe in the future, okay, let's say we want to cooperate with France and, for example, let's say military base. Okay, so we are restricted. So we don't have we won't have any vision of like development in the future. So this seems a little bit unclear for me. Maybe it's a matter of interpretation, but let's see. I mean, as a sovereign country, we need to be able to, let's say, to choose to which is the to choose the allies. I don't know, to choose. I don't know whether NATO, for example, or I don't know, Russia. It doesn't matter. Let's say in this point, I just want to bring the examples. Russia, Europe, US maybe want to cooperate with US and have like also military cooperation, but this agreement is kind of restricting like our future. And I would like to mention, maybe this is the last thing, that we need to avoid the situation as a state where we are going to have clashes in our territory. So if you see right now, we have EU mission in Armenia. On the other hand, we have Russian bases. We are going to have a land where American private, organization, security organization is going to be located. We have Iran who is against that. We have Turkey, which is going to gain a lot of pros from this corridor. We have Azerbaijan. It's kind of from at the first glance, it's really like weird, you know? And our diplomacy, our politics should be not to become an arena of geopolitical clashes. We have also China, which is not so happy that this road in the land is going under the US control. And yeah, we need to, the diplomat and the government is for that. They are the specialists to try to find out the most optimal and beneficial solution. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Armen. And yeah, that's indeed also a risk you describe on the diversification of foreign policy, that you have also so many actors being involved in that case. Thanks for this information. Before moving to the question on Georgia, which is still on the table, I do want to ask one more thing about the elections to you, Marina, is do you think that these elections also were in the back of the minds and the heads of the negotiators, both from Armenia and Azerbaijan, when negotiating on this declaration, and also in what way? Because also from the story of Armen, I also perceive, like, for example, the question of the referendum and the change of the constitution, a card that's being handed to Aliyev that he can use in any case when the referendum is not taking place or not how he would like it to go, and he can use it to put pressure on the peace deal and on the situation. Do you think these things have played also during these negotiations?
I think it's quite likely, yes. I mean, in general, the Armenian government and the administration desperately needs a success or a win. Because in the last couple of years, throughout the negotiation process, Armenia has basically just given concession after concession, and indeed not really any visible wins. So as Armen mentioned, you could really see that on both sides, Azerbaijan and Armenia, the really communication kind of strategies kick into play and really present this as a huge win for their party. So I think they are keeping those elections in mind. I agree that this will probably be the major point that they will be bringing ahead, that that this administration brought about peace. That's probably going to be the message. And what happens if they're not elected? Then what happens to the peace? I think the elections in general will really, the situation will really depend on whether or not an actual viable challenger to Pashinyan stands up, because so far, as you both mentioned, the ratings have been falling. But because there hasn't really been a viable challenger, there's an opposition. But the biggest challengers are the representatives of the former authorities who were ousted in 2018. They're even less popular, so they haven't really presented a very viable challenge until recently. That will be something to keep an eye on the coming year, I think, if a force emerges that is able to kind of mobilize support. Because when you look at the polls, there's a huge part of society that's kind of taking its hands off of both sides. So they're not really participating, they're not really active, they don't really want to get involved. So who's going to be able to mobilize them? That's going to be the question, I think. I forgot the other question, the thing you asked.
Yeah, it's on the referendum, mostly also being a
card.
Right,
yeah. It could very well be, because again, in terms of legal documents, as I said, the treaty itself says that no national level legislation can go above this treaty. So there is no legal need, as far as I can understand, to change the constitution. But politically, it's a card. It's something that the Aliyev will probably try to use, because I do think there's not that many incentives for Azerbaijan to want to sign a peace treaty with Armenia, because it's clearly the stronger partner, the stronger party. There could always be an opportunity to get more concessions. So why kind of sign yourself into an agreement now, you could say. At the same time, now that they've expressed this, with Trump, sitting alongside Trump, I think there might be some apprehension that I think all leaders in all countries feel of angering Trump. What happens if he does take it personally, if you don't deliver on your promises? You just don't know. The unpredictability of it could actually be a way to keep things calm and to kind of restrain any ambitions that there might be. But yes, this is the constitutional thing is the card that Aliyev can play. On a maybe slightly more positive note, I think the Zangezur route was such a card as well, and it looks on paper at least as if it's been in that sense de-weaponized, in the sense that Armenia seems to be keeping its sovereignty over that piece of land, which was a danger of losing it. Yeah.
Yeah, clear. Thanks. I hope you have 5 more minutes because I still have
Sure.
a question on Georgia. Okay, super. That's great.
Sure.
And I wanted to ask it first to you, Armen, because the question specifically it's from in the chat from Peace. It's more on the domestic situation also. So is the situation in Georgia affecting Armenian politics? And I think this especially alludes to the protests in Georgia and democratic backsliding. What do you think, Armen?
Yeah, affecting in terms that it's in terms of like kind of they are getting more Russian direction in these terms, yeah. No, I would say like currently it's I mean Georgia is kind of like a separate topic, and even in this all these like road initiatives, so the arguments are also that pro arguments actually is that currently we have one road actually which passes through Georgia actually to Europe, to Russia, and so on. But the arguments are that this road also is gonna cover the to diversify actually all these economic roads and capacities. I didn't notice like till now any impact of the internal political situation in Georgia. Yeah, I know what's happening there, but nothing like till now. I would like also to know in the future also from the Georgian experts what they think about this road. Are they happy with that or not? Because my assumption actually they shouldn't be too happy as well, because like kind of they are losing some kind of leverages that they like currently have in the region, because they are also kind of a road, a bridge, let's say between Azerbaijan and Turkey. Yeah, this Baku-Ceyhan oil pipeline and so on goes through Georgia. They also, I think they're also quite concerned, but what's happening actually in the backstage, it's I don't have the details and can't comment on this. I would like myself to hear the Georgian experts.
Thanks, Armen. And what do you think, Marina, here, and also negotiations-wise or diplomacy-wise, Georgia was, I think, also notably absent from this whole process.
Yes. I mean, Georgia hasn't really ever played a major role. I think it tried to keep more or less good relations with both parties, although I think the relationship with Azerbaijan was slightly closer because of economic interest. But in general, Georgia has kind of tried to keep neutrality. I would say I agree that domestically, that's what was my impression as well when I was in Armenia, that it doesn't really play that much of a role what happens in Georgia. But I would argue that geopolitically, it absolutely affects Armenia's chances in future and potential. It's in a way, it's quite tragic that these two countries are going through these processes in parallel, but in on a diverging paths, let's say. Because for how long was it? About 20 years, Georgia was kind of the beacon of democratic development in the region. It was it was very almost extremely pro-Western oriented. Saw Russia as a threat. Armenia used to be a Russian ally, is now trying to really distance itself, and seeing more chances in other parts of the world, including the West. I think Armenia's position would be a bit stronger if it would have a natural ally in the region. And if their positions would converge, And for the Georgia of the past, Russia could have been such a basis on which to converge these positions, because Russia had always been seen as a big threat, and then the Armenian government, if you look at the statements of especially in 2024, has started to see Russia more of even potentially threats than an ally. I think this could have been a basis for them to grow closer, and it would have been easier. It would have been less isolating for Armenia. I think at the moment Armenia is really quite isolated in the region in terms of its borders, so literally isolated, but also politically, because it is now the only country left that is still on this democratic track and is still looking to really enhance its relationships with the Western democracies, which is a point of worry, because how long will it be able to last, especially in an environment where security is such an important issue? How strong, there's always a tension between security on the one hand and democratic freedoms and the democratic space on the other. So how will the government deal with that? We're talking about the elections before. One thing I think we haven't mentioned is that there is a geopolitical angle as well in terms of Russia, because Russia has been losing its standing in Armenia. So there is a major expectation. I would expect there to be a major push from Russia around the elections to kind of gain back some of this influence. What form that will take is a bit unclear, at least propaganda, I would say, but it could be more. We don't know. And how will Armenia be able to withstand if it's so isolated? So that will be, it will be difficult, I think, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Also, really to keep tab on, as we also saw in Moldova, Romania, other countries which are less isolated, I would say. It's a big risk to take into account. Unfortunately, we don't have more time to delve into all this. I think we can take like 3 or 4 hours next time. But I think that's something definitely to keep the discussion going, and towards our parliamentary elections in Armenia next year, to also again organize a webinar such as this. It was very interesting. So thanks so much, Armen, and thanks so much, Marina, for the last hour.
Thank you, Emil.
Thank you too, and
Thank you, Emil.
also for the viewers for the question. Thanks so much for joining again. So as I said, we'll keep these webinars going. We'll definitely organize much more in autumn around the elections coming up in Georgia as well, which will be very important one to cover, also with everything happening there as well, and much more. So yeah, you can keep noted in the newsletter and also via our website. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you in the next webinar. Thanks again, Marina and Armen, and have a nice day. Bye bye.